Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you. Hey mamas, it's Melissa from Honest Mamas, and welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, episode number 27. Today I have the absolute pleasure of chatting with Avi Klein, who is a psychotherapist in New York City. And I was really excited for this topic today because I think it is something that I talk so much about with friends, with colleagues, with clients. It's about how can we navigate all the challenges around our relationship with our partner after a baby comes. And I think it is such an awesome topic to talk about. He's going to give us tips. We're going to talk about communication strategies. We're going to really dive in deep. So take a listen. Let's get started with my conversation with Avi Klein. Avi, thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm very happy to be joining you.
Well, I thought we would dive in. I've actually been really, really excited to have this chat with you because I work with individuals, but I work with couples also struggling in this way of, transitioning to parenthood.
Yeah.
And you work with a lot of expecting or new parent couples.
Yeah.
And I thought we could just kind of dive in, just starting with what you sort of notice most of the time with couples in this state.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'd love to hear your observations too. I think the thing that stands out to me the most for expectant couples is that, and I just want to be clear, even there are a lot of different types of people come to parenthood in a lot of different ways, but when the language I'm going to use and what I'm thinking about are heterosexual couples in particular, just because that's primarily who I work with right now, and I know other experiences are different.
Absolutely. I'm glad you named that.
Yeah. So I think something that I notice a lot is a dynamic between the expectant mother and her partner where every sort of action around preparing for the baby is a kind of referendum on their relationship because there's so much anxiety leading up to this big life change. And so it's an area where there's a lot of opportunity for conflict. And so if the partner doesn't understand what's going on for this expectant mother, there can be like a tendency, they might sort of de-escalate by kind of being dismissive about their worries, trying to be reassuring, but it just lands as not taking their concerns seriously enough. Mm. And then I see a lot of couples where that's what's been going on, and now this new mother is freaking out because their partner just doesn't seem to get it. If they don't get it now, are they going to get it when they're a father? And
right.
That's usually, it just is off to the races from there,
Yes. I know for myself, I am a mom. Certainly that time can be so fraught with anxiety. And, I work with a lot of couples, as I already said. And a lot of times it's, teaching people how to deeply listen to each other so that they do feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
And so many times I hear, probably like you, well, if they're doing this now, whether it goes both ways, if they're doing this now, what's to say it won't get worse or, be the same when baby comes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with these relationships that come into your office that, are really either have been struggling for a while, there's sort of been an undercurrent of a system that, or, dysfunctional dance, as I like to call it, that hasn't been working. How do you work with couples to sort of get them to bridge the gap to connection in a time of such change and also a lot of sleep deprivation?
Totally. And, I worked with couples on sort of both sides of that threshold, very new parents and expectant parents. And one of the reasons that I started working on this course is because it just seemed so intuitive to me that this is something that would be great to do before that baby is there, because then you have so many other things that you want to be focusing on. It's so rough to feel like your relationship is in a bad place then.
Absolutely.
So because sleep deprivation is real and the effects, I think, can be felt in a lot of different areas.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's not so different from working with any relationship, right? I think Obviously, helping couples slow down, really listen to themselves and to each other. A lot of times, I think becoming a parent, you're bringing all of your experiences of being the way you were raised and the parents that you grew up with. So sometimes that's a really important piece for the other partner to understand. Like, why is this thing so important right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But your wife is coming at this where this feels like a really essential thing to, like a really essential box to check. I'll give you an example of what I'm thinking about. This couple that I saw fit this profile perfectly, and mother-to-be was really like super on top of everything they needed to do to get ready for the baby. She had like lists upon lists, so many checklists.
I know no one like that.
It's crazy. Who would get stressed out about something?
Oh my gosh, not me.
And her husband was kind of, I think, part responding to her level of detail, was taking like a very chill, relaxed approach to all of this. And so every attempt by him to reassure her really sounded like he was just dismissing her concerns, and he wasn't following up on the things that were important to her. And it was only when we got to that kind of biographical piece and she was able to share, there were two things for her that really moved me, and I think moved her husband as well, who knew these things but didn't see them in this context, which was one, that she had a really neglectful mother growing up. So she had really high expectations for herself to parent in a different way. And I think, when we're trying to change that story, the emotional intensity we bring to it can be quite high and understandable. And then two, because she had not had a very involved parent, she really learned that to get by in the world, and she was quite successful, she had to be really on top of everything.
Such a common theme. Yeah,
absolutely. And so I think when he was able to hear that and place it in context, he could step up, because he could do it for her in that way. He understood what it meant to her.
Versus you're just trying to be controlling, or your anxiety's just running the show here, or you're annoying me. It became something deeper and more meaningful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different layers to working with couples before a baby comes. And, I always recommend, I love it when couples come in and they're either thinking of having a child, or they're newly married, or they're about to get married, or, they're in the earlier stages, to really try to like course correct.
Yeah.
And, for me, typically one partner, it can come up as a way of control. And then the other partner, and this is again, very generally speaking, is sort of the one that's like, well, what are you freaking out about? So just relax.
Yeah.
But, through doing this kind of inner work and through slowing it down and teaching people how to communicate with one another, I think is paramount to not only having a successful marriage and relationship, but also being a successful partner.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you introduce kids into the mix, there's just so much more. Like, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot with these couples is that a relationship can be fine and you can get by when it's just the two of you. Things that bother you, you find ways to cope, I mean, I don't think anyone has to be everything for another person, and people find, like, okay, that's what you like to do with your friends on the weekend, like, I'll do something else, When you have a kid, you're so dependent on your partner.
Yes.
And it's not so easy to look past these things that might have bothered you, or, where you haven't been able to align.
And I think it's so hard when you bring that up, because I think in so many ways, women generally, and again, we're talking this one kind of dynamic of how a relationship can be, there are many, but, women can sort of feel as if, they're the ones that are growing the baby inside. They're the ones that have to go through labor. They're the ones that have to potentially, if they choose to, breastfeed. Yeah. And they're the ones that probably maybe are taking some time off after having a baby, and maybe their partner's going to work. And so in the wake ups in the middle of the night, perhaps it's a little bit more on them to get up and be with the baby. And again, this all is varied for everybody. It's so different for everybody, but generally speaking. And so I run into this dynamic a lot with clients where and I know this for myself too, that's why it interests me, is that, there's so much that I want to control, and there's so much at times that I resent controlling. And I hear that over and over and over again, because at Honest Mamas, we work only with the women's side. And so I'm just curious, in your experience as a couples therapist helping couples in this way, like, how do you help navigate allowing the partner to kind of show up and almost kind of showing their partner, hey, I'm here and you can trust me, even if balls have fallen before and things have gone through the crack? How do you help them do that?
Totally. That's a great question. And I think the first thing that popped into my head when you were asking that is, for me, when I'm working with a couple, the moment that I think where you really feel a shift, like something different is happening here, is when each partner can own their kind of like their typical responses, right? When they start to anticipate the dance that's going to happen between the two of them, and they can name it rather than just going to it.
Yes.
And so, like, saying something like, I find myself going to that place where I just want to control you, I just want to criticize you, right? I'm feeling really scared right now, I'm worried you're not going to show up. It's such a different conversation,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that to me is kind of, that's the place I always want to help couples get to, because then when you can hold both sides of that dance, then you suddenly are way more flexible to find a solution that's respectful to both people.
It's interesting you say that, because I too, what comes up in my mind as you say that is so many people still in this day and age feel that feelings are weak, or, if I kind of name the dance, then what if my partner didn't know that that's, really what was going on? And, I'm kind of outing myself and I'm being vulnerable. And, in your mind, do you feel like vulnerability is definitely necessary in learning to communicate with your partner?
Yeah, I think so. I think, right, that for a couple of reasons. One, I think sometimes you need to develop the trust to do it, but if you come to your partner in a vulnerable way, it just really shifts the energy of the conversation.
Yes.
So that's a win right there. Like vulnerability, I think, invites more vulnerability. Sometimes, some partners don't know what to make of it, but that's something that can be kind of learned and coached, with like when they experience someone else's vulnerability for the first time. But so that's just having a different conversation is a really great first step. And then two, when you're in touch with your own vulnerability and your partner's vulnerability, then it's like you know what the real problem is, right? It's not this superficial stuff that doesn't make any sense to anyone. It's like real matters of the heart. So you want to really like solve the right problem. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And the other thing that comes up is that couples may have an argument, and we'll get to kind of how do you teach your couples to argue better in just a moment, which I think is so helpful. But, an argument may emerge, and then they'll come into my office and say, oh, but no, we're over it now. And then slowly but surely things sort of pop up.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious on your end how you help couples really clear out that stuff that sort of builds up, I guess, like plaque, if we want to use a very kind of visual term, that kind of builds up over time. How do you help them kind of clear that out?
Well, I think again, it's like you may have solved that superficial problem, right? But the couple may not understand what was really going on there, right? The deeper need that wasn't being addressed, rupture that happened. So sometimes that's a really important, getting to that level allows you to move past it in a deeper way. But the other part of it is that along with understanding what's happening, learning how to do a really meaningful repair, right? Where someone can, I don't know if you experience this, but there's so many people who have a really hard time saying they're sorry in a heartfelt way. And so helping people learn how to do that so that their partners feel understood and seen and known, that's huge. That when you can be vulnerable in that way, it's not so hard to get back on track.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. And I find it so helpful, whether it's in my own relationship or working with clients, is that one partner will say something and a couple things happen. sometimes the other partner, you can just tell they're not really here. They're thinking about what they're going to say in defense of or in explanation of, and they're not really staying present to what their partner is actually saying.
Yeah.
And then the other piece that can happen, and I remember in one, I don't know who said it, but at one point it's almost as if the words leave your partner's mouth, they kind of get shifted around midair, and then they land on you in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And so I oftentimes, whether it's to my partner or whether it's in the therapy room, say to people like, what did you actually hear her say? Or what did you actually hear him say? How did that land on you? What did you hear? And really learning to listen without having a rebuttal, without having a response right away, can be terrifying, but especially if you're fighting for something that you really care about.
Yeah.
But it can also be very liberating to get you more easily to a peaceful conclusion or situation with your partner.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
So when you say repair, I know, it's very common in our culture to use that word, but for people that are listening that may not exactly know what that means when you say you've got to have repair in your couple, how do you handle that? What does that mean to you, and how can our listeners understand that and maybe take it into their own partnership?
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about is when one partner feels really let down by the other partner in some way, that let's just make it a little easier. So let's say like a wife really feels let down by her husband, that the husband is able to listen in a non-defensive way to how she felt hurt. And he's able to understand, based on his knowledge of his wife, this person he spent all of his time with and who he loves, why this is really hurting her right now. And that he can apologize for having done that, and that he sees how it hurt her, and he knows why it landed the way it did. That I think when you're able to do that, it really lets someone feel like they're seen. It's not just an apology to move on, right? And then I think organically coming out of that, there's often an opportunity for what can I do now to make it up for you? Or you might just know, you might have a suggestion in mind, but obviously leaving it up to make sure that your partner feels comfortable with it. What you can do to rebuild that trust or get back on the same page from there. I think it all kind of lines up if you do it that way. So that's kind of jive with what you're thinking?
Yes. And I'm also thinking, absolutely. I'm also thinking that it may take a couple rounds of repair. I think sometimes people will say like, oh, we already talked about that. Like this is like the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th, 20th time, whatever, that we've talked about this. And, I just think it's important to let couples know that the repair may just take a few rounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think going to your question before about like how can couples sort of, what do you do? How do you have a different kind of conversation? Or how do you argue less? Or all of those big questions? To me, in keeping with this, one is, I think more than anything else, cultivate an attitude of curiosity. It's really hard when you feel like you're the punching bag and you're the object of someone's scorn. So I totally understand that. But when things are calmer, to be curious, like if your partner is so upset about this, let go of having to defend yourself and just try to understand, what are they so upset about? And if you're having such a hard time listening to them, be curious about that too. Like, why is this so hard for you?
Right.
Some things aren't hard, but this thing is, right? I think that curiosity can get people continue pretty far if you stick to it.
So how do couples really learn how to argue better, would you say? Any tips that you can help our couples that are listening really try to have a different relationship? Because I don't know if you agree, but I don't see arguing as a bad thing.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if people don't argue. I'm sort of like, what's going on there?
Yeah.
But, I'm just curious, in your perspective, how do you help couples navigate arguing a little bit more? I don't even know, just arguing better, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And it is it's a little worrisome, actually, if you don't argue, because nobody's perfect. So what are you doing with the things that aren't sitting well with you? It's definitely okay to argue.
Mm-hmm.
I think going slow is really big. Just like if you feel like your heart rate rising, you feel like the pace of the conversation quickening, slow it down. Just put your brakes on it and regroup. is a really good way to keep things from getting out of hand. Obviously, a big one that some couples, it's easier for if you've been arguing for a long time, it gets harder to just keep the personal attacks out of it. That's a huge difference between a conversation going well and not going well.
Yes. The below the belt comments.
Yeah, like that. I mean, if your goal is to solve this problem together, then that's not helping you, right? So you should be clear what's motivating you to do that. And then, I certainly can understand how people are feeling that they go there, but got to be clear with yourself what's your ultimate goal.
And then if you do go there, make sure you repair for that part. Yep. Absolutely. That wasn't productive. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I did it out of anger. Mm-hmm. I was being a jerk, whatever.
Yeah. I think, like I kind of mentioned before, just cultivating both curiosity and observation about yourself and about your partner, but primarily I think about yourself, to be able to kind of narrate, I find myself feeling this when I hear you say that, or I'm having this reaction where I just want to pull away or shut down or stop talking. If you can say it without doing it, that's a huge win for the conversation in your relationship, because partners don't understand what's happening inside the other person a lot.
Right. We don't come with a manual, unfortunately.
Yeah. So that's it's so helpful and appreciated, because then, if you want to pull away, then your partner will understand it's not a rejection of them, that it's you feeling overwhelmed.
Right. So, and I think another important piece, which I'm sure you'll agree with, is not to all of a sudden start being curious when you're in triage moment. Like all of a sudden, like, okay, now I'm going to be a deep listener. Like, these are really skills that you have to cultivate when things are going even well. Say, for example, if my partner starts talking about a particular sports team and I'm sort of like, oh my gosh, here we go again. Tell somebody who cares about the sports game. I really don't. Can I stay open and non-judgmental and really see it, from their perspective in terms of how he feels, and how excited he gets and what excites him about this particular game and this team, as opposed to automatically doing the thing that I do of kind of shutting down and tuning out.
Right. Yeah, it's great. That's a great example. And I agree. I think it's hard stuff to do. So practice is required, and it's good for your relationship all the time. I think it's kind of what you're saying. I would agree with that. And
so I think this is such a great thing to dive into too. How do you help couples around intimacy after a child? A woman's body is changing. A man's, I've heard men say like, oh, I've seen some things now. I was in the delivery room, or, I don't know, she's different than when I married her, or maybe I'm feeling insecure about being a father. And, maybe sex and intimacy isn't like the first thing on new parents' minds. So how do you help couples kind of come back together around intimacy after a child?
Yeah, I have a lot of different thoughts about that. But one that I feel like is an important caveat is that it's really important to me. I have certain ideas about, I think, what might be nice for a couple, but it's important for me not to tell people how to live their lives, So there are a lot of different ways that you can do it. But in my experience, I think this is a really great opportunity to develop a deeper, more connected sexual, intimate relationship. That you could go back to the way things were before, and some people want to do that. They just kind of, I definitely have worked with women, for example, who just want to get their bodies back,
Yes.
And husbands who also want that to happen. And that's okay, and I'm respectful of that. But to me, I'm more of the mindset that you don't get that back, right? You're always different. We're all changing. Yes. And that it's an opportunity to really just more deeply connect to who you are now versus who you were at some other point. And that might mean in the beginning that your idea of intimacy is sort of not applicable to that moment. Like a postpartum body, it needs gentle care.
Right.
What I mean? Sex might not be on the agenda for a while. And that doesn't mean you can't be intimate. And I'm not even like talking about sex acts, you know what I mean? That there are ways to cultivate that deep connection, which I think couples really need at that time.
Yes.
Without going right to sex, which is kind of our intuitive place to go.
And any tools or tips that you would tell couples who are actually in that place of, sex is sort of off the table now for whatever reason, but we still know that, connecting intimately is important.
Yeah.
What do you recommend to them?
Definitely. Well, I mean, I'm thinking back to when my daughters were born, like in those early months, we were kind of lucky to just have time to ourselves, like any kind of real focused time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would start there. It's so when you are like exhausted and have been doing all different kinds of things during the day to take care of your new baby or your other children or your home, maybe yourself, maybe you took a shower or whatever is going on, that to just have a few minutes of really concentrated time together without your phones, where you're really just talking or telling each other something that you're thinking about or feeling during the day. Maybe you're holding hands, maybe you're lying next to each other, right? That's a nice place to start. And I think people feel the quality of that connection.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. It's almost like a little check-in. How are you doing?
Yeah.
How are you doing? Mm-hmm. How are we? I remember, as we're talking, I'm getting a memory of being up absurdly late with our first child, and baby's fussy, and we had some things that we had to do for feeding. Back in the day, there were a couple complications, and we had to get a tube and a syringe and some food, and it was so absurd, and we were so exhausted. The only thing we could do was laugh. And I know there were other times that the only thing we could do was argue with each other. But in those moments, I had so much appreciation for my husband just to be able to just share a laugh with me and just say, like, this is crazy. Like, this is a form of torture, like this is so beyond anything that I could ever imagine in those really, really, really hard moments. That thank God I've got someone like you. Like, I couldn't do this alone. This is so hard. Yeah. And I know that there's so many people who do it alone, and they're extremely courageous and brave. And in those hard moments, for me, my experience in my relationship was just having so much gratitude. And so I think that kind of ties me back to another piece when you're giving tips to clients, couples. It's sort of like, what can you be thankful for? Maybe if it's he just took the dirty diapers out, or he held the baby, even if it was for 5 minutes, or whatever.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was going there myself. That I think that gratitude and recognition. I think both parents need that, right, for different reasons. But that really letting someone know that you see them, appreciate them. That's its own form of intimacy, especially if you know your partner and you know what's important to them, to let them know that you see them doing that.
Yes.
Be very meaningful.
Yes. Well, thank you. I mean, we could talk way more on this topic, and, we do have to end for today, but I so appreciate you coming on, and I'm curious how people, if people want to stay up to date with you and kind of see, your new course that's going to come out, how do they get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, let me see there. So right now, check out my website, which is Avi Klein, Klein.com. And I've been posting some things on Instagram. I've been trying that out. And so people can check me out there. The name of the course is The Compass Project. So if you search for that on Instagram, you will find me.
Wonderful, Avi. Thanks so much. And I'm sure we'll have you on again soon to talk more about couples challenges and reconnecting after and right before a child. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening today in my conversation with Avi. I thought so many things stood out to me, which I really hope you all will find beneficial, that you can really implement into your relationship ASAP. And I love it when he said vulnerability invites more vulnerability. I think that's absolutely true. And I always encourage my couples to speak from your heart, to speak vulnerably, so that you can really dissipate some of the tension that comes up naturally in relationship. The other piece that I also thought stood out to me was naming the dance that you two sort of get into versus going through it. If we can stop, if we can pause, if we can reflect, even in a moment's notice, to say, okay, here we are again doing that thing we do. Can we pause and slow down and try something different? So I hope you joined today's podcast. And for our show notes, sign up for our e-course or get more information, you can go to www.honestmamas.com/episode 27 and also join our community on Facebook by going to www.facebook.com/honestmamascommunity, where these conversations and way more will continue.